ready to begin the case?
Let's do it. That sounds great.
All right. So your client is a large urgent care chain with 190 offices throughout the United States. You've been brought in 2 weeks after the company awoke to a cash crunch. The company has been rapidly growing through M&A, adding 75% to revenues over the last year. Sales and earnings are up, but cash is down. Specifically, that's measured by the average days of sales outstanding, which is defined as the average number of days between providing services and getting paid. And that has slipped from 35 to 62 days. And the client would like to get your advice on how to tackle this problem.
That's great. Okay. So that's really interesting. It feels like there's a lot to unpack there. So I just wanted to start by checking my understanding of the information. So it sounds like the client is an urgent care chain. They operate in the Western U.S. only. They've been going through a lot of M&A. They've grown their revenues by 75% over the last year, grown their earnings as well. But they're experiencing a cash crunch. So the way that they get paid is primarily through insurance companies. So they're paying
Yeah,
a large portion of the costs. And then you also have patients who pay an initial copay, a small piece, and then whatever remaining cost insurance don't cover. So there's this sort of dual income stream.
yeah, that's
Um,
right. So yeah, the company provides the services, bills insurance, and then insurance
mhm,
bills later. There's usually a balance left over, which is what the patient pays. And then, like you
yeah,
said, there's a copay that's a small amount, but we can ignore copays for the purpose of this case.
got it. Okay. And then they think about this with a metric called days of sales outstanding. So the time between providing services and collection of cash. And this has gone from 35 days on average to 62. So that's a pretty big increase in time.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. And I guess just to check the objective. So the idea is we need to diagnose the underlying problem here.
Diagnose the problem and figure out how to tackle it. Exactly.
Okay. Okay. And then I I guess my ingoing hypothesis really is that the M&A is going to be a driver of the cash crunch. But has anything else notable happened with the company lately?
Nothing notable.
Okay. Well, that's great. Do you mind if I take a second just to structure my thoughts?
Sounds good.
Okay. Um, see if I can flash this up on the screen here, and if you'll see it. I don't know if any of that's really coming through, but I'll talk you through the way I'm thinking about this here.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I've got three major buckets that I want to dive into. The first one is I'm calling this payments and financials by business line. So I really want to dig into this by business line. So we have their core business, I guess, and then each of the different acquisitions after that. I want to get a better understanding of the revenues they're collecting, so the amount of them, the timing of when those are coming in. Similar on the cost side of things, like what the amount of their costs, the time of their costs, really just to get a sense of what is the underlying driver of this cash crunch. And then also trends, considering the M&A activity, getting a better picture of how has this changed from pre-acquisition to post-acquisitions. The next area I want to dive into, I'm calling business line operations. So this is really the cash collection process, understanding do each of these different business lines collect cash in the same way, or have there been any changes? Also, the level of integration. What when you acquire a company, there's going to be a big process in integrating that into your core business. So understanding where each acquisition is in that process, and I guess how much more work there is to do. I think I'd really like to zero in on the finance and accounting departments here because they're going to play that big role in collecting cash. And then similarly, just trends over time, like how are these processes looking between post and pre acquisitions. Then the last bucket I'm calling insurers and patient base, almost like your customer base that's paying you. So on the insurer side of things, looking at who are the insurance companies that we're working with, how many are there any new insurers or any changes from pre and post acquisition, and then similarly on the patient base, like with the acquisitions, are we serving a different type of customer base? Are there new patient groups or any changes or trends we'd want to look into? Um, So I think diving into each of these sections is really going to help us answer this question. My initial hypothesis is that it is the acquisitions that are not collecting cash as effectively as the original core business. So I'd like to validate that by diving into my first bucket and understanding more about the cash collection by each business line.
Yeah, I think that's a great framework, and it's a good path to go down. So the first thing the client wants is to estimate the amount of cash that they're losing now that the collections are slipping. So let me give you some more information there.
Okay.
We know that the core business, that is the business before the acquisitions, generates 350 million in revenue. The acquired company A generates 175 million, and acquired company B generates 90 million.
Okay.
And in the core business, the days of sales outstanding has shifted from 30 days to 51 days. Acquisition A has went from 35 days to
Hmm.
70 days, and B has went from 54 to 89 days.
Wow.
So
Okay.
if you got all that, if you could just do a calculation on how much cash they're losing out now as a result of this shift.
Great. Okay. Um, yeah, there's a lot of data you just gave. I think that's really helpful to answer the question. I'm just going to put this into a little table here. I just want to make sure I'm not losing track of any of the numbers. So from a revenue perspective, we have the core business is 350 million, A is 175 million, and B is 90 million. Um, it looks like we're talking about this in terms of days shifted. So I think what would be helpful is I could make an assumption about the number of days in a year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, why don't I just assume 350 days per year of like operations, if that
That
makes
sounds
sense?
good. Yeah.
Okay. Um, so I think it'd be great to go from their overall revenues to revenue per day. So it's really easy for our core business, 350 million in revenue, 350 days a year. That's $1 million per day. Um, acquisition A is lower. That's about 500,000 per day, considering the revenue is half. And then for acquisition B, it's not completely clean, but it's close enough to 250,000 a day, so 0.25 million a day. The next thing I want to look at then is the days of delay. So for the core business, it looks like if I read your numbers right, the days have been pushed out by 2 days, and then both acquisitions look like it's been delayed by 35 days, just over a month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then it basically we just need to multiply the revenue per day that we calculated and then the days delayed. So for the core business, we have 21 million of delays. That's 1 million a day times 21 days. That's easy enough. Acquisition A, we have 500,000 a day times 35 days delayed. So 17.5 million. And then acquisition B, 0.25 million a day, 35 days delayed. Here we're looking at about 8.75 million. Okay, so if I sum those up, here's my chart.
Mm-hmm.
If you sum those up, it's 47, 48 million in that ballpark. Does that
Yep.
sound about right?
That's similar to what I have. Let's call it 48,
48? Okay.
and move on to a brainstorming exercise. And I'll have to give you some
Okay.
context for this. Specifically, we want to think about how the revenue cycle management function can improve. And so there's a few different groups within the RCM function. So there's the data
Okay.
entry team. They transcribe paper charts with handwritten notes from doctors into the electronic health record system. There's the coding team that takes those records and codes them
Hmm.
into the appropriate CPT code, which is then how the insurance company knows what to pay. The denials team deals with payer rejections to submitted bills based on violations of contract, coding errors, and other issues. So a bill can be resubmitted, and if the violation is cured, it may still be paid. But if too much time passes, if it's over 180 days, it may become ineligible for payment. Then there's lastly the call center, which makes outbound calls and receives inbound calls from patients to make reminders about outstanding bills and answer any questions. So with
Okay,
that information, what are some potential changes that might have occurred that cause this function to break down?
got it. Okay, so if I'm hearing this right, there are 5 different teams involved with the payment collection process: data entry, coding, denials, call center.
Yep.
Or is that only? Yeah, maybe that's 4 teams, but that's a lot to coordinate. Um, and also, that's further compounded by the idea there's 3 separate business lines who are probably doing this work independently, to some extent at least. Um, so I'm thinking about this in terms of each specific department. They have unique activities, and there could be some different rationale for each department and what might be driving delays. So I'm just going to come up with a bucket for each of these different departments, and then for good measure, we can add in one overarching bucket. Um, so diving into that overarching bucket first, I think the big thing could be just headcount in each of the teams. If a company gets acquired and integrated in, you might lose some of the teams. Either they've left, or some team members might have been fired after the merger. So a drop in headcount could be a big driver. Um, there could also be something about the experience of employees. Your more tenured employees might have been more likely to leave or had opportunities elsewhere, so you're left with less experienced resources who are doing this kind of work. Um, there could also be changes in the way that they send information back and forth. So one team might communicate with another team. Maybe they're used to doing it by email or face to face, and now they have a new software program, and there's just a learning curve they need to figure out. Um, there could also just be something about duplication of efforts, duplication of work. Uh, maybe acquisitions are partially integrated. Maybe there some things are being done twice, and that's causing confusion. Um, that's all just in the sort of overarching bucket, kind of general ideas. But if we go into the specific groups, you mentioned the data entry team first. So they're taking doctors' notes and then transcribing them electronically into a system. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind with me is doctors have notoriously bad handwriting. So maybe if there's like new doctors, or they're working with new doctors, it might just take longer to read the writing, or you're more likely to make mistakes. Um, there could be a new software system that they're working with. They have to take these handwritten notes transcribed into a software system. Maybe some companies are using different programs that could lead to longer input times, or a higher likelihood of errors. Um,
Hmm.
I think that probably goes for the pen and paper doctors are using too. Maybe they have new forms they need to fill out too after the acquisition. Um, that's all that's really coming to mind for me for the data entry team. That seems simple enough. Uh,
Yeah,
the,
yeah, makes sense.
the next team you mentioned was the coding team. So they take the data from data entry and they sort of segment that into specific codes. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Um, I mean, I guess the obvious thing to me is maybe there's just new classification systems or new codes. One of the acquisitions is maybe used to doing something a little differently. They have new codes they need to use now. Um, so you could get mistakes, or maybe folks are just taking longer to do their job because it's new. There could be
Hmm.
newer software too.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that seems all right for coding. I can't think of anything else there either.
That
On the
that sounds good. That sounds good. Yep.
Okay, on the denials team. So you mentioned they deal with rejections, payer rejections. So an insurance company might deny something, or there's an internal error.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So maybe if I think about that external communication, maybe there's a different process. Maybe they're talking with insurers differently. maybe before it used to be phone calls and email, maybe now there's some kind of new portal or something that they need to input that the core business might have been using before. Um, so it could be that insurance companies are taking longer to figure out how to use an online system or an online portal. It could be that our own teams are struggling with the system, but just that external communication piece could be a challenge. And then the same idea applies to our team. There's an internal communication piece. Maybe there's something about our teams learning how to use a new software system, or just communication handoff errors. Um, and then also that could just be different insurers or different companies that you're working with, and maybe some have more stringent standards than others. Acquisition A or B could be in a completely different type of service. Maybe they provide something different. They're dealing with different insurers, and it just operates differently, right? There's a learning
Hmm.
curve, or different regulations to think about. And then the last piece you mentioned, the call center. So they make calls to the patients about outstanding bills. So similar to the denials team, I think there could be new communication approaches. If their job is to be really pushy with patients to get them to pay up, maybe there's different approaches to uh, how many times are you supposed to call, how pushy or how aggressive are you supposed to be on these phone calls. um, yeah, maybe just also new phones, new call center equipment. You're still learning how to use it.
Yeah, I think those are all great ideas to investigate. And the client team has ran an analysis on revenue cycle management headcount, and what they've seen is that um, the total revenue per headcount has grown from 3.5 million to 5.1 million over the
Hmm.
past eight months, which is when the first acquisition closed. So there's definitely something there. And the good news is that can be easy to solve with just hiring additional folks. So the client wants to turn
Sure.
to what to do with the uncollected cash. And so for that, I'm going to share a chart here, and then you can just walk me through
Great.
your observations. Just one second. All right, can you see?
Yep, it's coming through. Perfect.
Awesome.
Okay, so it looks like we're looking at so AR, I'm assuming that's accounts
Yep,
receivable aging over time,
yep,
and by business line. So this is really helpful.
yep.
Um, so basically, this is the uncollected cash for each business line and the length of time that it's been uncollected. So if I look at the first segment on the left, it's uncollected cash for less than 60 days. So I'm seeing a big spike in the core business of about 35 million in cash, and
Hmm.
then significantly less for the acquisitions. But acquisition A has twice as much as B, so it's about 20 million versus 10 million or so. In the next segment, there's a similar story, a big spike for the core business, around, say, 12 million, and then smaller spikes for A and B, about 2 to 3 million each. But past these time frames, the trend seems to reverse. So A and B have more uncollected cash, and there's a longer tail of
Hmm.
uncollected cash from the acquisitions. Um, so in the 121 to 180 day mark, there seems to be a resurgence of uncollected cash. So it looks to me like the core business is more effective at collecting cash sooner. The acquisitions have this long tail of uncollected cash, um, at the end. So we may want to look into the time and effort it takes to manage the tail. Um,
Hmm.
Maybe it's more effective to write off the 180-day section. If it's taking a lot of internal effort for lower reward.
I think that's a good observation. I think you nailed it. So I'm going to drop this chart and then move on to the next thing. So the partner agrees that the client should be laser focused on the go forward process, and
Hmm.
actually believes that they should outsource the collection of anything, any payments that are currently over 90 days.
Got it.
So then she asks you to make a couple calls to determine a good vendor for a collection agency, and you find two options. So The first option, the vendor is going to charge $130,000 fixed fee plus $2 per bill that they collect. And the
Okay.
second vendor would charge 100,000 retainer plus
Okay.
1% of the receivables. And I might need to bring the chart back up again so you can calculate that. And then for context, you can assume that the typical urgent care trip is $250, billed at $250.
Got it. Okay. Um, so just I've written down these two uh, agency options you've come up with, and it looks like one is calculating the fee based on number of bills, and then
Mm-hmm.
one is the total value of receivables.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a different approach. It looks like we need to calculate first. We need to calculate the uncollected cash after 90 days because you mentioned this is just post 90
Yep,
days.
just those bills. Yep.
Okay. And then we also need to get to a number of, I guess, an associated number of bills.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start out calculating the uncollected cash. Great. So looking at the chart, if we're looking at post 90 days, if I look at the core business, to me it looks like 3 million, 1 million, or 1 million or so. In total, I'm
Yeah.
assuming about 4 million, 4 or 5 million in that ballpark.
Yep.
Acquisition A, if we sum up these three columns, we're looking at, it looks like 11 million or so quite a bit higher. And then for acquisition B, it looks like 4, 3, 6, and say 1. In total, about 10 million or so. Okay, so summing those up, I'm going to say 4 million for core, 11 million for acquisition A, and then 10 million for B. So about 25 million total.
Yep.
Does that sound right? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so the total receivables here for post 90 days would be 25 million. The number of trips then, you mentioned the bill would be $250 on average.
Yep.
Okay, so then we need to take this 25 million, divide it by 250, and then that will give us the average number of bills. Okay, 25 million, 250, 100,000 is what I'm getting. Does that sound right to you?
Yep. Sounds good.
Cool. Okay. So I think it's easy enough then to just plug these into the fee approaches that you laid out before. So for option one, it's a retainer of 130,000 plus $2 per bill, and we have 100,000 bills. So 130K plus 200K. That's $330,000. The next
Mm-hmm.
option is 100K as the retainer, and then 1% of the total receivables, which is 25 million, 250 and 100. Okay, so that leaves the total fees at 350K. So based on this, the fees are pretty similar, but it looks like option one is a little bit cheaper. It's 330K versus 350, so it's cheaper by about $20,000. It looks like option one is probably the way to go for us.
Yep, exactly. And then the second part to this question. So now that we've narrowed into going with option one, we'd like to think about how much money we're going to get back. So the partner asks you to vet success rates across this vendor, across the amount of payment days. And so you hop back on the phone and learn that for payments that are 91 to 120 days overdue, you can assume you get back 90%.
Okay.
121 to 180 days, assume you can get 70%. And
Hmm.
over 180 days, assume you can only get back 3%.
Great. Okay.
So yeah, question is how much net can we get after we pay the fee to this vendor?
Got it. Okay. again, I think I want to put this into a table. It looks like there's quite a bit of information. So I'm going to start by putting some rows for our 3 time periods here. We have the 91 to 120, 121 to 180, and then 180 plus, just like our chart. Um, so I'll need to estimate the amount of cash in each of these buckets. So if I look at the first one, so this is the middle section in our graph. Um, I'm estimating about 10 million in uncollected cash in that one.
We can say 9.
Yeah. Okay. And then 121 to 180. It looks to me like it's a little over 12. Let's say 13 or so. 13 million.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last bucket we have, it's fairly small. Why don't I just say 3 million here? That's about 1 million each. And then
Okay.
recovery percentages are 90%, 70%, and 3%, it looks like.
Yep.
Okay. So it's just a matter of multiplying that through then. So if we take, for our first row, we have 9 million in cash multiplied by 90% recovery. That gives us 8.1 million. Then 13 million times 70%. That looks like it's in the ballpark of about 9 million. And then the last row, we have 3 million times 3%. That is going to give us a much smaller number, 0.09.
Mm-hmm.
So if I add that up here, we have our total at the bottom of 18 million. So
Could you check that math again?
Sure. I mean, I guess you're right. I think it's definitely a little less. I'm probably rounding a little bit more than I should be. It's going to be closer to 17. It's like a high 17s. Okay. Yeah, it's closer to 17.2, I think.
Okay.
Does that sound right? Yeah.
That
Okay.
sounds good.
Okay, 17.2 million. And so you asked for the net, right? Net of fees?
Yep.
Okay. That makes sense. So then if we're going with option 1 and we have our fees of $0.33 million, then if we subtract that, then the net value will be 16. Just rounding a bit here, but net is going to be about 16.9 in that ballpark. So that's a pretty good return on investment from my perspective. If you can spend, $350,000 and get back almost 17, that's not bad.
I would say so too. I agree. Okay, so that's all the information we have for now. At this point, the client would like an update on what we've discussed so far. Would you mind taking a minute and coming to a conclusion?
That's great. That's great. Yeah. I'll just take a second here to structure my thoughts if that's okay. I've got a few pages floating
Awesome.
around.
Yeah, no worries.
Great. Okay. So we've really dug into our clients' cash collection problems. And the recommendation that we came up with is we want to engage an external cash collection agency to help us collect the long tail of outstanding payments that we're seeing in our acquisitions. So we're recommending this for several reasons. There's an additional $48 million of uncollected cash compared to the pre-acquisition rates that we were finding. The long tail of uncollected payments is primarily driven by these new acquisitions, A and B. And there are several market options to outsource collection activities very cost effectively. So it looks like our recommended cash collection agency is going to cost about $330,000, but we can expect about $17 million in cash to be collected. So that's an amazing cost benefit trade-off, I would say. If I think about some of the risks of using a service like that, the cash collection agency, they might not hit the market-wide cash collection rates that we were seeing. Um, we got some averages from the market. We'd want to look at this company specifically and do a bit more diligence on them. We also don't know how long we'd be expecting to use them. If we think about these acquisitions, maybe once they're fully integrated into the company, the process will become a lot more smooth. So when I think about next steps for us, I think some further diligence and vetting of this collection agency would be really helpful. So looking at reviews, looking at their success rates specifically. We also want to understand the acquisition integration process a bit better. So, you know, getting a sense of how fast or slow it's moving along, it might impact the cost benefit analysis of using the agency or not. This process could be seen as sort of a band-aid. So the long-term fix would be you fully integrate the process and standardize the operations so that the business lines perform equally well.
Sounds good. Thanks, man. We only have a few minutes left here before Zoom cuts us off. So I want to do feedback. I'll have to do it quick. I'd love to make it more of a discussion, but I'll
Okay.
just say briefly, great job on the case overall. There was a lot of details here, a lot of different parts, and we got through it pretty efficiently. I think you did a great job in 3 specific areas. One was being engaging throughout the video interview, so showing me your work, showing me, saying what math you're going to do, confirming where the numbers are on the charts that you're pulling from is really great. The second thing, all the math was correct, so that's great too. We moved through that pretty quickly. And then all of your information was pretty case specific. So you had a lot of good ideas in brainstorming and the structure. And by the way, both brainstorming and structure was very MECE, so that's another good point. But very detailed, very case specific. So that was excellent. The one thing I would suggest to improve on is I thought during the brainstorming and maybe the conclusion, you were a little long-winded. So it's okay to take a few minutes or 20 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever, to when you start brainstorming or when you get a chart to kind of think how you're going to approach it and be very surgical. And the point of brainstorming is really to be more pithy and say, here's what I think some suggestions are, and then prioritize. So you don't have to get super detailed, perhaps maybe not as detailed as you did, but I still think detail is still kind of a plus. So it's kind of a fine line. But that's what I would say. Overall, very strong. Any last second questions or feedback on your end?
No, I think it was good. I appreciated the confirmation that you're giving me throughout, letting me know if I was doing something right or helping if I got off track. I noticed on the math I made one sort of minor mistake, so I appreciated the guidance there and the chance to go back and fix it. But overall, it was an interesting case.
All right, awesome. Well, Chris, it was great talking to you. I'll see you later.
Great, thanks so much.
All right, bye.
Cool. Bye.
Hey everyone, it's Kenton Koveski here, the founder of Rocketblocks. Thank you so much for watching this mock interview video. I hope you found it informative and helpful as you are getting ready to prepare for your own interviews and hopefully landing that job offer you are excited about. We have a ton of great content on the Rocketblocks channel coming out on a weekly basis, mock interviews, mini lessons, and chats with our Rocketblocks experts. So if you haven't subscribed yet already, please do so. There is a big red button below. And if you hit that, you'll get all of our content as soon as it comes out. Thanks for watching and have a great day.